Hi everyone, welcome to our first webinar on women's health. This is going to be our first in our series of events. The next three topics that we will cover will be home monitoring and chronic disease management, wearable devices, and finally mental health. So look out for that in the coming months. Depending on government regulations, we hope to move the sessions out of Zoom. I'm sure everyone's feeling a little bit of Zoom fatigue. So hopefully we get to meet you all in person within Catalyst premises for the subsequent sessions. So yeah, let's get into it. Today we are very honored to have a panel comprising of, comprising of heavyweights within the industry. First, we have Dr. Mahesh Chulani, who is the founder of INEX and is also a practicing obstetrician and gynecologist. We have Dr. Tan Thiam Chai. Dr. Tan is an obstetrics and gynecologist at ONG, the Women's Medical Specialist. Formerly, he was the HOD of obstetrics and gynecology at KK Hospital. And we also have Amrish Nair, who is the founder of Biorhythm, which is famous for their Biorhythm fetal monitor. I'm sure many of you in the industry would have heard of our esteemed panel. And if you have any questions after this webinar, or if you'd like to reach out to them directly, we've also provided their email addresses at the bottom of the screen. So I'll be your moderator for today. Nice to meet you. I'm Louisa. I'm a manager at PwC's Venture Hub Health Tech Advisory Practice. So maybe I'll go in a bit about the agenda for today. So today's agenda will be a quick 10-minute industry download by Dr. Zubin Darawala, and then we'll move into some questions for our panelists. And finally, we'll open the floor to all of you for you to ask your questions for the panelists. We encourage you to utilize the Q&A function within Zoom. I'm sure it's at the bottom of your screen to do so. You can do so anytime throughout the webinar. We want to keep this interactive. And while not on this slide, you'll hear from Dr. Zubin very shortly. So Dr. Zubin is our health industries lead for PwC Singapore and Southeast Asia Consulting. He also leads our health tech advisory practice. On top of consulting, he is still a practicing clinician, so we have many doctors in the house today. Zubin, I'll pass the time on to you.
Great. Thanks, Louisa. Very good evening to everybody. We're pretty excited to have people like Mahesh, Thiam Chai, and Amrish join us. So thank you all for your time. I think before we start, we thought we'd keep this a little bit engaging. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I'm sure all of you have heard the term cradle to grave, which is depicted, well, we hope we depicted it well, with those two icons on the top, right? So what I'd like to do is ask all of you to type in your responses to what you think the next line is, the second one. What do you think that refers to with the baby and that shovel? Let's have a bit of fun and see if anyone can get it. That's a good one. Oh, someone got the third. Yep, okay. Someone's got it, but birth to earth, right? So, yep, the second one is birth to earth, and someone actually, Jeff, well done. You've got actually the third one, which is sperm to worm. So before we start, maybe let's try the last row there. See if anyone can guess the last row with those lips and a star and a broom and smoke. Any other takers? So I'm just going to give it away. Ah, there you go. Jeff, you've heard all of these. Have to meet you. So absolutely, lust to dust. So I think the point we wanted to get across is, historically, when we look at femtech and women's health, historically, once a baby was born, we would be able to deliver care. Technologies came into play, allowing us to do new things only after birth. But if you look at the explosion of knowledge and technology over the last number of years, we've really gone further and further and further upstream. So the point is, from instead of cradle at birth, then even before birth, right? When sperm, and obviously then even before that, when people are just even thinking about it, right? So the point is, technologies advance so rapidly that we're now able to do a lot of cool things a lot earlier. And hopefully you will hear some of these examples as we go into the panel discussion. So on that, can we just move to the next slide, please? So I think the way we look at it, we've taken here the femtech industry, and this is not put together by us. This is from CB Insights. What they did was they categorized femtech into 8 industries or sectors, and we've adapted it slightly. So it's not exactly what you see here, but essentially these are probably the bigger categories, right? So fertility, then you have period and fertility apps, pelvic health, pregnancy, nursing care, monitoring devices, general women's health, period care on its own, and then sexual health. If we move to the next slide, please. When we look at the globe, there are a number of examples in all of these categories. So we've selected a few just to illustrate them. No reason in particular for having picked any of these companies. But the point is that there are these notable startups globally. Now, most of these examples are in the US, but I think we'd like to draw your attention to the kind of funding they have received. If you just look at the top and work your way down, you see funding that is just disclosed, so not undisclosed funding, anywhere from 20 odd million US dollars all the way to $200 million. So you can see there's a lot of interest. There is a lot of appetite for investors to actually put money in this space. If we come closer to home and move to the next slide, please. We do realize that femtech is a niche market, and we honestly feel that it is poised to be one of the next market phenomena in the health tech space. We say one of the next because over the next 4 weeks, we're going to share other sectors and categories which we feel are also quite revolutionary. If I draw your attention first to this circle on the right, what we've highlighted is those 8 examples alone on the previous slide actually comprise almost a quarter of the total VC funding in femtech in the preceding 7 years before 2020. All right, so quite substantial, just those 8 companies. If you look at the graph on the left, what you'll see is in 2020 alone, there has been more than 1.3 billion US dollars invested in this space. And maybe just some points to note, right? 3 main key points. The femtech market size really is about 19 billion US dollars. And it's expected to grow at a CAGR of about almost 16% to about 60 billion US over the next 6 or 7 years. The APAC region is expected to grow the fastest with a CAGR of 16.1%. And according to Asia Nikkei, there are about 318 femtech companies worldwide as of March 2020. While this figure may not be the most accurate figure, I think the trend is what we wanted to show. If you look back in 2017, it was stated that there were about only 50. In 2019, just last year, there were about 221. So you can see this really substantial or exponential increase in the number of companies in the femtech space. If we move to the next slide, please. I mean, we're all from Singapore or Asia, I assume, or at least the majority of us are. So if we look closer to home, we really have already started to see the emergence of femtech companies in Singapore and the region. Our panelists will share their own experiences and the companies that they've started and are involved in. But maybe just to highlight a couple, right? So INEX, which one of our panelists is the founder of, Mahesh, it was founded as a spin-out from NUS. And it was really Asia's first healthcare tech company for women, all right? The company does offer diagnostic and precision healthcare services across 3 core offerings. And last year, they were very proud to announce a US $72 million merger with a company by the name of Nova Satra. And they've been backed by investors like Genting and Enterprise Singapore and SNS Holdings. And maybe Mahesh can share a little bit of a story later on. The other 2 companies here, again, no reason in particular that we're putting up. Naira, a general women's health app with a focus on period and fertility tracking. It was launched last year in May. It was really introduced by a tech company by the name of Vivant, and that was around since end of 2017. And Vivant is supported by AJ Capital and intends to obtain a US $10 million funding round sometime this year. And then lastly, Carmentix, which was founded in 2015, backed by Esco Ventures with about $3.5 million USD. And it really aims to address early prevention of preterm birth through prediction. through a novel biomarker prognostic panel for preterm birth. So some really exciting, interesting companies. Thank you. From our point of view, I think while there are a number of categories, we really believe that these three in particular have the potential to not only improve women's health, which is the more important thing from our perspective, but obviously from a business perspective and investors, they are very lucrative opportunities. And these really would be the fertility space, pregnancy care, and advanced women's health. If we move to the next slide, please. I think I'll just end by giving an illustrative example by something that Forbes mentioned. If you look here on the right, I think the point is that in femtech, there is a lot of potential, a lot of untapped potential. And we're starting to see a number of companies enter the sector and grow. I think it's best summarized by that line there that you see on the right, that there has been a recent surge in femtech innovation. This was by Mobi Health News. In femtech innovation. However, much of this is aimed at women in their reproductive years. Just of interest, there was a Hacking Menopause Challenge, which promoted non-invasive tools to help relieve menopausal symptoms. We're seeing a number of companies in that space as well start to emerge, but it is still very early days. So I think on that note, I hope I've given a little bit of an overview of the femtech space. If we can move to the next slide, please. I think I'll let Louisa take over, and maybe we will get this panel session open, and happy to take questions throughout. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Zubin. I hope that was useful for you all in getting a good sense of the industry. Again, we'll be happy to answer any questions later on, so please put it in the Q&A box. If you have any questions for any of our panelists specifically, also do type that out. We'll be able to see it. Now let's turn the spotlight a little bit and move straight into our Q&A session. So the first question is for Dr. Mahesh. This is something that I'll personally like to hear from you, wearing both your clinician hat and your entrepreneurial hat. So the first question is, what are the key challenges, for example, like regulatory obstacles or anything else that you anticipate companies might face when developing or rolling out new diagnostic solutions in the women's tech space within the Singapore market and actually to even the broader regional market?
Thanks, Louisa, for that question, and thank you all for inviting me here to your panel. I think perhaps the biggest challenge that this space actually faces, you see, cancer, stroke, cardiac disease, ischemic heart disease is all very easy for everybody to understand. They know what it is. They can get a handle on it. And there are many sources of information, and we're always being bombarded with that information. But women's health is a lot more nebulous, and people find it difficult to put their finger on it and understand what it really means. So the first challenge, of course, is to be able to learn the subject area, or have enough people know the subject area, and to be able to dream a big picture as to how we can come together to contribute to femtech or women's health. On the ground, of course, there will be issues about the readiness of the market to appreciate the value of such work. And that comes back to not actually understanding the area very well. So we need to spend some time educating everyone about the value of this space. And the value is not just technical, like fertility, but the value is social, because women actually are the nidus of every family, and the family forms the social fabric of society. So caring for the woman, and this has been shown throughout the whole world, caring for the woman in her needs actually strengthens our society as a whole. And we need for people to start to understand that, so that they can spend more time thinking, dreaming, visualizing what can be done to bring new ideas to the ground for women's health and femtech.
No, 100%, Dr. Mahesh, thanks for that. I like hearing that the whole female empowerment stance coming from someone as highly regarded as yourself. So I was thinking, Dr. Tan, do you also have the same kind of sentiment? Anything you want to add on here?
Hi, Louisa. Thank you
Yeah.
for the invitation. So I fully agree what Mahesh has said. I just want to add on a few points. So for me, my main work is mainly on fertility and pregnancy
Mm-hmm.
care, and we know that worldwide we are doing we are losing the battle against fertility. I think worldwide fertility trend is dropping. Especially back in some countries, Singapore included as well. I know that last year we had one of the worst fertility rate in Singapore, and we are seeing this trend will continue to drop. This is despite huge governmental efforts to raise the fertility rates. So I think that we probably have to look at a lot of tech initiative on how can we facilitate or help women to actually improve the fertility or start thinking of the fertility as well. I think I'm glad that there are some firm techs that are starting to go into this direction of having a fertility coaches for actually the young women who are in the millennials. Actually, they should be the ones starting to think, and we should concentrate effort in looking at how we can enhance their fertility at such a young age. I think instead of concentrating our effort in the elderly women in the 40s, 45, which we know that the success rate is much lower. I think a lot of effort should then be actually helping this younger group of women achieve their optimal fertility and even starting family early, so that as a society we can move forward.
Can I jump in here and just ask something? Thanks, Tiamchai, for those comments, and Mahesh as well. Mahesh, can I just ask you to maybe build on what you said? You mentioned women's health is very nebulous, and I think a lot of people agree and say that. Are there any specific reasons you feel that is the case? And the second part then would be, do you feel the reasons are things that health tech and entrepreneurs should actually start to address?
I'm not sure I can answer the second one very easy, second part of your question very easily. But I think for the first part of your question, Zubin, the reason is you showed just now a cartoon of cradle to grave. We talk about womb to tomb, and actually, if you look at women's health actually goes all the way. So we're not looking at just one woman. We're actually looking at 3+ generations in each woman. So we have when the female is in her mom's womb, her eggs are already being made, right? And then she goes through puberty, and then so when they're children, they have issues as young girls. Adolescent age, they have a series of issues. Then when they are older and fertility is an issue, pregnancy are issues that need to be addressed. Then you come to menopause and come to malignancies. So when we try to encapsulate women's health, really all of this is women's health. And one sometimes find it more challenging to see this big spectrum of what women's health entails, as opposed to seeing, the blockage of a coronary artery and leading to a heart attack. That's why I think people need to spend more time understanding women's health and then deciding which aspect of women's health they would like to address. And Amrish will tell you about a very exciting aspect of women's health that he is addressing, both the mommy and the baby. So they have chosen one area to focus their attention on in this spectrum, and they've done it very successfully. So that's the nebulous aspect that people need to spend time understanding the spectrum.
Okay, thanks, Mahesh.
Yeah, actually, Amrish, would you like to share more about your thoughts on this matter?
Yes. So I mean, thanks, Mahesh, for the nice segue into this. And Biorhythm is very much focused right now on the pregnancy journey and how we can make that pregnancy journey better. And like Zubin very rightly pointed out, it's one aspect of women's health. And you're looking at, adjacent aspects of women's health, preconception fertility that Dr. Tan spoke about, post-conception, where you start looking at problems including fertility, but menopause and things. So what we're looking at, and the reason we took one problem is that the nature of the problem changes throughout the lifetime of the, and when we look at this, we are looking at really how do we make it better in 4 ways, right? And it's cost control. How do we make sure cost is affordable? Cost of care is affordable. How can we improve clinical outcomes if there are any? How do we improve the patient and the clinician experience? And it's really looking at it as a whole ecosystem rather than just a single point of focus, because care is provided by the clinician, and the subject of the care is the woman herself. But you're also looking at what does this mean for clinical outcomes? What does this mean for cost? And, just even looking at how COVID has impacted this whole thing, right? And how we've really how we really need to take a new look at this. It's, you're looking at women who've had to go for appointments alone, who have faced increased anxiety and frustration. So it's even the extra medical part of care that actually really needs to be taken into account. And that's why what women's health is today and how it looks like tomorrow will look very different. And I mean, the amazing work of Dr. Tan and Prof. Mahesh will be a big factor in all of that. But the technologists really need to look at the problems faced by the multiple different stakeholders and how we can boil that down to how can the science support all of that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Amrish. Actually, we have I know we haven't opened the floor yet, but Jamie has just brought across a really good point that I would like to hear 3 of your opinion on. So, Jamie, it's a unisexual name, but I think you could be female. Judging from the panel today, proves my statement that a majority of the tech industry consists of men. Do you think that the men and the experts will be able to have the understanding of women's health and the difficulties that females face? What do you think?
Maybe I can jump in. So currently, I'm advising 2 startups, and they're both helmed by female actually. So maybe in the next 1 year, you'll probably see them coming up. I mean, one of the startup is actually looking at fertility, how to enhance fertility, and another startup is looking at self-testing of HPV test and a STI test as a home-based test. So to reduce the stigma of going to the clinics for tests. So these are very passionate women who wants to bring forth female issues. So I think that is a good start, and I'm fully supportive of them.
Dr. Mahesh, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I fully agree with Tamjak, and I agree with Jamie as well, because we were joking just now before the meeting started that that, 3 guys talking about women's health was quite funny. But I think this is not a trend that's going to last. I'm also aware of quite a few young startups helmed by women. Paying attention to women's health, and they understand the matter much better than us. They are closer to the problem. They have connections on a daily basis with people with similar issues. They'll have a needs case analysis that's more clearly defined. And I'm very confident that once this area starts to grow and we find ways of nurturing the environment, that we'll see many bright young women leading this space in a great way.
I agreed. And I think just to add from a market perspective, what we see in the industry, no doubt. In fact, I think the company Stiam Chai is referring to, we've even spoken to some of these ladies. We are definitely seeing an increase in women, which is great, because the truth is, obviously, women are going to understand women's health problems a lot better than men. But I think it's also accepted that historically, just, you know, for whatever reasons, that hasn't been the case. But certainly more and more companies, and not just in women's health, in health tech in general, we're seeing a lot more female founders, which is great. We're seeing a lot more women come up with solutions in terms of how to improve care. So I think we're all really excited on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, even at Biorhythm, we're proud to say that, you know, as part of the way we're structured, more than half our staff are women, and our entire leadership team are women, and including the engineers. And we feel that as we need to have honest conversations with the people who use our technology, and as long as we're listening to them with open ears and making sure that there's as little bias as possible, filtering those conversations, I think that's the most important step. And Jamie's 100% correct. I completely agree. And I think it's generally reflected, like what everyone has said, in the hiring patterns, the trends, and the growing prominence of women as, you know, more female founders join the fray, as more women join startups. So it's an exciting time, and it's I can't wait to be a part of that. So yeah, thanks.
So I think I'd like to touch on this topic a little bit more. I think this has generated quite a bit of interest. Which areas within femtech in particular do you feel have the most pressing unmet needs that startups and health organizations can explore, and why? And what outcomes do you think we can have? Like, you know, what Amrish mentioned about cost control, about clinical outcomes. And I think that can also address some of Tiana's question. She did say, you know, fertility is always mentioned, but what about the flip side of females who don't want to get pregnant? Any comments, Amrish?
Actually, maybe before Amrish, you answer, there's another question that ties in nicely in a separate chat from Tamana. She said she's curious to hear the panel's perspective on why topics such as menopause are so under-addressed at the moment in terms of emerging startup digital solutions. So maybe we open it to the panel, what Louisa just read out. What about the group of women who cannot benefit from some of the upside benefits of having conceived, as well as issues like menopause? How is this being addressed? Open to any of you to take first go.
I think maybe I would just talk about just now you're talking about the contraception. So actually, I recently saw this startup that actually is starting online contraception clinic for patients, because previously, you know, contraception usage is very low in Singapore. A large part is because of the stigma of going to the clinic to see a doctor. You know that because in many countries, the contraception is available even as a kiosk, so that it's more convenient for the patient. But this is not the situation in Singapore. So there's actually starting of this startup that does an online contraception that you can register and see the doctor as a teleconsult, and the prescription can then be delivered to the convenience of the home. And I think these are good initiatives that should actually be encouraged. I also feel that there is not enough looking at aging process, not just menopause, female aging process, and that is actually critical, because from the 2030s onwards, a large population of our population, both male and female, are going to be in the aged population, and that is actually a very significant number. I don't think we've started to plan, not enough started to plan how we can enhance the aging process, how we can actually do more counseling to see how they can live better. I think there is a lot of room for us to look at, not at menopause itself, but looking at the aging process itself.
Mahesh, you were going to say something?
Yeah. No, similar to what TC was saying just now. So women spend half their life in the menopause, right? So half their life spent in the menopause, and sometimes the best part of their life in that space, because they've had the children gone to school, and then they have time, they want to do different things, they want to explore the world, maybe not in COVID, but other times, and there's so much to be done in that period of time. we were doing well on menopause for a while, and then we got hit by the HRT problem, hormone replacement therapy problem, and then since then it's been a little bit of a void space. But the second part of what TC says is correct. Two changes are coming in the near future, where people are going to be spending a lot of time focusing their attention on aging and reproductive aging. And that addresses how the individual ages, rather than we're not so much the conversations about whether there are balustrades to hold as you walk down an elevator or escalator, but more in the actual biology of the aging process. And more time will be spent in the very near future specifically to understand the biology of the aging process. And the biology of the aging process will be different in women as it is in men. So a lot of science will appear probably in the next few years. We'll be hearing a lot about this. And that once the science begins to appear, then it gives the startups the opportunity to pick certain areas of that scientific arena to spend their time and develop technology that can then go on to be used by the women in that age group.
Amrish, do you have any comments? Thanks, Mahesh.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question, Tiana. And what we are looking at is, how we can build a general platform for women's health. And we started with pregnancy, but how do monitoring technologies actually contribute to this? Like what Mahesh said, there's a biological aging process. There's trajectories for the aging process as well. How is there any role for technologies? Yes, certainly. And how we've developed the platform is that clinicians can actually use a lot of these technologies in these adjunct areas and its adjacent areas. And so it's very much, again, the end user, the woman herself, the clinician, and how do we actually build an ecosystem of what care do they need, how are they taken care of emotionally as well, and how do technology support this? So building general platforms that women can grow with beyond the pregnancy would definitely be important. And it's how we take care of a woman for life rather than just for the 9 months of the pregnancy. So I think that is the driving factor for us as part of a femtech company. We've just started in one place, but how do we extend that into the other aspects of our life as well?
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Amrish. So I was thinking a little bit about that and what Dr. Mahesh said earlier as well. So as health tech solution providers, we place the patient at the core of our offering, right? We place the patient experience, patient outcomes at the core of our offering. What can we do to facilitate ease of use in the health tech solutions that we provide? Now, especially if you're looking at something like aging, some of the older women, would you think that they will be also receptive to the health tech solutions that we provide? What can we do to make it easier for them? I'll open it up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can kick this off. This is kind of a raison d'etre. So the user experience is central to everything that we do. And so the technology fits the user experience. And, our target population generally tends to be under 40 years old, most of them generally very technically savvy. And you're right, there's a whole population of women who are beyond that, who also need care. And so mapping out what the user needs is actually central to all of this, and mapping the technology to those needs. And that's why I think the technology companies need to move from a system of we have a technology, how do we address the user, rather than we have a user and how do we build the technologies for those users. Mobile apps may not be the solution for everything. And how do we build ubiquitous monitoring, for example? How do we build sensors that live in people's everyday lives, into fabric, clothing, into accessories that women can wear? So we're going to evolve from medical looking gadgets to how do we actually build sensors into people's lives that they can carry around with them and can be a part of their life. So this translates from pregnancy all the way as women grow older and experience the different stages of their life. So the user experience is central to all of this. And we build the technologies for that user experience.
Great. Thanks for that, Amrish. I think that's very insightful. Dr. Tan, what do you think, especially with the one who brought up, that aging is going to be a huge opportunity for femtech?
I want to bring your attention to another aspect of medical care for the aging, not just looking at how we can help with the aging process. I'm a very big believer of predictive medicine. And now with many of the femtech, it's very possible now with a salivary test, we look at some of the genetic profiles to predict a woman what is her risk of getting certain diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, like cataracts, like macular degeneration. And once we know that, maybe we can take steps that we know to prevent them from getting the final disease. So I'm a very big, in fact, just before the COVID, many of the countries, Australia and US and UK were actually evolving to do that as a big population study and a research to see whether this predictive medicine can help us to prevent end-stage diseases. I think no longer we need to wait till we're 80 years old to know that, oh, I have cataract, I have heart disease, I'm prone to cancer. We can predict what is the risk of us getting that disease and do active steps in our 40s, in our 50s to prevent us from getting that disease. I think as a population, that is very important. I think prevention is, even in healthcare economics, is much cheaper than treating the disease. So I think femtech in predictive medicine can help with the aging process.
Thanks, Dr. Tan. So actually, that's a good question for me to follow on with Dr. Mahesh. Dr. Mahesh, can you explain a little bit about Xena? It's an early detection blood test for ovarian cancer, if I'm not mistaken, launched in 2021. What kind of impact do you think that this will have on the medical community and how we look at and how we detect ovarian cancer?
Thanks, Louisa. When I described the picture earlier about women's health, and I thought menopause and cancer in the later age groups. So ovarian cancer is really a cancer of is practically the cancer of the menopausal women, although in Asia, the premenopausal women also tends to get some ovarian cancer. And we've got no proper tool to screen for this or do predictive analysis for ovarian cancer. But what we can do with ovarian cancer is try to develop technologies to find the disease early. Maybe not predict the disease, but find the disease early. There will be a small subset of women who may have a genetic predisposition, like breast cancer gene, that might have ovarian cancer, but that's a small number. But the majority do not, more than 90% are not in the age group. So currently, the only biomarker available for trying to identify the disease is CA125, but this is not a very good biomarker. And then for early stage diseases, it's like tossing a coin, about 50% effective. So what Xena is trying to do is trying to use alternative biomarkers, a panel of biomarkers that the ovarian cancer might be sending out into the into the woman's bloodstream early enough for us to read the signal and suspect whether the individual is carrying an ovarian cancer, epithelial cancer at the start, but ovarian cancer in specific. And if we were to combine this with an pelvic ultrasound scan in the presence of an ovarian mass, whether it's cystic mass or complex mass, together with this panel of markers, our early data suggests. So we've run a 400 patient sample set already. We're running a 600 patient sample set now. And if the data from that reveals good results, we'll be running a 1,000 patient sample set. And currently, our data suggests that we can pick up about 85% of the cases. So again, in clinical studies, these are not huge numbers. 400, 800, 1,000 is a good size, but it's not a huge number. And so in clinical studies, we would start at one level and then escalate the numbers to see whether the reality of what we find continues to pan out. But if it does, then it's going to be quite a game changer to help find ovarian cancer, which is a killer, as we know. Ovarian cancer much earlier in the disease process. Finding it early has a tremendous advantage because whereas on the late stage disease may have a 40 to 50% or maximum 60% survival, but early stage disease has a 90, 93, 95% survival. Late stage disease requires chemotherapy. Early stage disease may not require chemotherapy. So there are advantages to trying to find this disease early.
That indeed sounds very groundbreaking. Thanks for sharing. I mean, I'm sure, you know, once it launches in the market, there'll be a lot of interest for it. Now I want to stay on the same lane, but kind of pivot a little bit. So why do you think, and I think it's also one of the questions that was brought up in the chat, why do you think that, or do you think that investors are increasingly interested in the femtech market? And what are some of the recent inflection points, particularly within the region? I'll open this up to the panel.
I could take a stab at this. It's really about a few things, right? It's about the confluence of technology coming together, solving a social problem, and there being a real commercial case for this. And so investors are looking at both impact as well as value of the investment at this point. And increasingly, the social impact is coming to the fore, and is becoming an increasing factor in investment opportunities. And looking, I think what Dr. Tan mentioned at the start, right, or Dr. Mahesh and Dr. Tan both mentioned, women are the core of the families generally, and they run families. They're such an indelible part of society, and having a social impact on women, improving their lives makes a big difference. And I think it's frankly a little sad that it's only taking up till now for for society as a whole to realize that. But at least it's happening now, and it's going to progress. So I think the real inflection point here is the recognition that social impact can lead to proper investment outcomes. And properly delivering on those value propositions will have clinical benefits, social benefits. It would have cost benefits for the whole of society. So, and even extra medical, like how better health contributes to the economy, to jobs, women going back to work, women working for longer, women choosing to work from home. There's so many extra medical benefits to this as well. And I think it's, like I said again, it's better late than never, and at least it's happening now. But I think that's the real inflection point.
Mahesh, Jamchai, any comments on that?
I have a bit of a side funny comment, and that is I think the reason that inflection didn't happen earlier is because there were not many women in this game, and if you look at practically everything that's happened in the world, when women put their mind to doing something, there is movement. So they somehow, when women get in on the game, whether it is participating in medicine, participating in society, a lobby, when they get in the game, their voice seems to be much more clearly heard, and then the momentum seems to gather all around the world. And I think that back to what somebody said earlier, the reflection of three men in this room talking about women's health. It's about time once the women start coming in, I think we'll begin to see a massive uptick in this area.
Yeah. Okay. So I have 2 points to make. I think the first point I want to say is actually the impact of social media. You know that actually women are much better at using social media than any of us guys, right? I think Mahesh, you agree, we don't really use Instagram. But many women actually are very, very good. In fact, much better than the guys. And this has created a huge movement. And people have generated a lot of attention, a lot of interest, and a lot of impact as well. I think the fact that the women can use social media more effectively than men has actually moved this movement much faster. It probably accelerated this process 10 years earlier than what it would have if not for the intervention of social media. So I think social media is a big inflection point for femtech actually. The second point I want to talk about is actually about, since we are in Singapore, it's about the unique position in Singapore, why we are now in a very unique inflection point as well. Because in these recent few months, or in 1 year, I've been seeing that there's a lot of interest of the American companies coming to Asia, because Asia is actually one of the biggest market, especially to China, and also Chinese company opening up to America as well. But unfortunately, this inflection point is very unique because of the current tension between US and China at the moment. Because of this tension, the countries cannot travel as readily as them going through a third party like Singapore. So I'm just seeing that a lot of actually interest in Singapore companies marrying between Americans company and China investors and vice versa, American investors with Chinese company, because and a lot of this is actually happening in our region, especially in Singapore, because Singapore being a friend of both the countries. So I think this is a very unique inflection point for Singapore.
Very valid point.
Could I address a point by Dave brought up? That private investors tend to shun public health sector. I really think it's the motivation of the investors, and I've heard a very wise man once say that if the motivations are all lined up, the rest are just details. And it's about getting women into the investment game as well. It's about having people who are motivated to solve these problems in the longer horizons, rather than just the 3 to 5 year horizons. And it takes the role of government, it takes the role of private equity, venture capital, multiple types of assets to actually do this. And the more women get into the game at all these layers, the better it is to align those motivations across investment and technology development. So thank you, Dave. It was a very insightful question.
Yeah, I'd agree with Amrish on that, Dave. I think it's difficult to generalize you can't, the private investors to make a sweeping statement is a bit difficult. And certainly from our own conversations in the market and when we talk to industry players, a lot of the private investors that we speak to are more high impact investors now, social impact, not looking for, of course they want their returns, but it's not the returns of saying we want multiples of 20, 30, 40, 50 that drive them. They're happier to take the lower returns with the higher impact. Sorry, Louisa.
No problem. Yeah, so I think there were some good insights. I think one more question before we start to close off. And this is something that I did want to hear. What difficulties did you face during the initial / growth stages of your startups? And what advice would you provide emerging fintech startups? I think we see quite a few startup founders in our attendees list today. So I think that's something for the broader group. Dr. Mahesh, do you want to answer that?
Sure. I apologize if there's somebody cutting grass outside, so if you hear that. Yeah. So I think, as Zubin pointed out, we started out when there was nothing out there. I believe, if I remember, it was 2006 we started out, and at that time, neither did we know what we were doing, nor did people know what we were doing, and nor did we have the ability to explain to people what we were doing. So that was where we started off. And my only, but of course, as you say, it's inflection now. This is a buzzword. People are talking about it. Many more people know about it. Communication is easier. Tiamchai talks about social media spreading news much faster, much better. At that time, none of this existed. So I think the two parts to this is, one, to educate the ground, the potential users on the potential benefits of what we are trying to deliver. And as long as what we're trying to deliver is truly in the best interest, as Zubin said, high impact, truly in the best interest of the patient and the individual, as long as we can educate them, and then as long as we can have the passion to persevere, I think that would be my only advice, summing up some 14 years of what we have been doing here. Zubin knows our story, Amrish knows our story. We've chipped away at this for many years, but it's just a passion to persevere, and that's all I can say actually.
Amrish, what about
Thanks.
you?
Yeah, and I think it's exactly the message. And I mean, we started later than Mahesh, but we also face the same problems on the fact that people call pregnancy a niche problem. Then I said, we're all sitting in this room because of pregnancy. So I don't quite understand how that's a niche issue. And then you chip away, and then you talk to people, and you realize that everyone's affected by it. Everyone's had someone who's had an experience which could have been better, or someone had a scary experience with pregnancy. And at a deeper level, everyone's affected by it, but you really had to go down very deep to actually get people to connect with the problem. And otherwise, seemingly, obvious, what was otherwise seemingly obvious needed a bit of chipping away. And it really required belief in what we did. So the core team just had to knuckle down and just had to know that what we are doing, we're delivering better outcomes, know exactly what our objectives were: clinical, cost, and patient and clinician experience. And knowing those clear objectives, we knew we were contributing value. And it just so happens that COVID was an inflection point. It's been devastating for many, but it's been an inflection point in understanding value of remote systems, of technologies. And so, I mean, it took something like that to actually hit reset on the whole issue. So all I can say is don't give up. It's been hard, it's been painful, but ultimately it'll be worth it.
Okay, thanks, Amrish. That was very inspiring. Well, we have 5 minutes left. I want to hear from all of you. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Tan. If there is one main takeaway, take-home message or advice that you'd like to share with the audience here, what would it be?
So my advice for startup is don't be afraid to fail. Most startup will fail. In fact, 90% of startup will fail. But I think that what you have learned from your failure will probably help you to get into future success. So I think the willingness to fail will probably be the success of our startup.
Dr. Mahesh, what about you? Thanks, Dr. Tan.
I mean, my takeaway message is probably 2 points. One that I tried to suggest earlier, and one I learned from Zubin earlier today. The first is what we talked about just now, trying to dream the big dream, to understand the nebulous women's health space, and then our healthcare space, as if you want to expand the space, but dream the big dream. And the second is what Zubin showed us earlier with those cartoons, Cradle to Grave cartoons. My takeaway message will be put those two together and visualize to materialize.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dr. Mahesh. Amrish, and for you?
Yeah, and like I mentioned earlier, I mean, we are at the point where we can hit reset. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to make changes that we otherwise wouldn't have a chance to. And mindsets, goals, motivations, and the environment are all aligned for us to make this change now. So let's do it.
Zubin, I want to hear from you too. Thanks, Amrish.
I'd agree with TC actually. Don't be scared of failure. I think, I'm a product of the Singapore local system, and, over the last 40 years, I've seen it change well. People are scared to fail. They don't realize that failure is the runway to success. So I think there's so many ideas. There's so many intelligent people out there. Being married, I would say they're more intelligent women than men, because my wife's right in everything. Don't be scared to fail. Just keep at it. If you have a good idea and you know it's a real problem, make sure you validate that problem and just don't give up.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Zubin. I think there were some really good points brought up today. I think one of the main takeaways from me was learning how to communicate and educate the general public, investors, about the value of what you are bringing to your patients, and for them to really buy into that space. I think in our roles as, you know, within the PwC Health Tech Advisory space, or just in general consulting, not all the time you get very savvy investors, because you really need to understand a lot of the technicalities behind what's going on, especially within the health tech space, and even more within the niche space such as femtech. So yeah, that was a really good takeaway from me. Thanks a lot to the 3 panelists and for Zubin as well. I think one last thing is that if you would like to reach out to any of the panelists, we will be flashing again their email addresses. Feel free to reach out to them. And yeah, any parting words from anyone? And anybody has anything last things to? Oh, thanks Jamie. That was very nice. Thanks Tiana. I wouldn't have to hear such comments as, "Are you PMSing every time my mood changes?" Okay. Okay, and that's it. Have a great evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Catalyst, also for organizing this with us. Utma, Azra, we really appreciate your help. Do stay tuned for the other 3 sessions that are going to be coming up. Hopefully, we can do that in the Catalyst setting so that we can see all of you in person. I think it'll be much better and engaging session then. All right, feel free to reach out to us anytime.
Thank you again, Mahesh, TC.
Thank you. And thank you to the panelists.
Thank you. Great session. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.